Now, there are moments in history when events unfold in such a way that they appear shocking, sudden, and completely unexpected. But sometimes they are not unexpected at all. Sometimes they were predicted years, even decades in advance by those who understood the deeper mechanics of power, conflict, and consequence. What we are witnessing today in the escalating confrontation involving Iran, the United States, and Israel is one of those moments. Because while many leaders now claim they were surprised by Iran's response, particularly its willingness to strike across the wider Middle East, there were voices long before this war began who warned that this exact scenario could unfold. One of those voices belonged to Zbigniew Brzezinski. The prediction, now more than a decade ago, Brzezinski laid out a scenario that at the time may have seemed theoretical, perhaps even exaggerated, but today it feels strikingly relevant. He argued that if Iran were placed in a position where it felt concerned, where it believed it had no option but to surrender completely, it would not accept that outcome quietly. Instead, it would resist, and not just resist defensively, it would expand the conflict. He emphasized something critical. Iran is not a small, easily contained state. It is a nation of tens of millions of people with deep regional connections, strategic geography, and the capacity to respond in ways that extend far beyond its borders. According to him, while the United States could undoubtedly inflict significant damage on Iran, Iran in return had the ability to impose serious costs as well. Brzezinski's warning went even further. He outlined a chain reaction that could follow a direct confrontation with Iran. He asked, what happens if the conflict does not remain contained? What happens if it spreads? He pointed to several critical flashpoints: the destabilization of Iraq, escalation in Afghanistan, unrest in Bahrain, attacks on oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia. And what we are seeing today is a reflection of those very risks. The concern was never that Iran would win a conventional war. The concern was that it could ignite a broader regional crisis, one that would be costly, prolonged, and difficult to control. One of the most important aspects of that prediction was not just military, it was economic. Brzezinski warned that any escalation involving Iran would directly impact global energy markets, and this is where many people misunderstand the situation. Oil is not a local commodity. It is global, which means if supply is disrupted anywhere significant in the world, prices rise everywhere. Even countries that produce their own oil are not insulated. If prices surge in Europe or Asia, they will rise in the United States as well. And the reason Iran holds such influence over this system is geography. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical choke points in global energy supply, lies within Iran's sphere of influence. Control or even disruption of that route can send shockwaves through the entire global economy. This is not theory. History has shown this before during the oil crisis of the 1970s when geopolitical tension translated directly into economic instability. And yet today, despite these warnings, many officials have expressed shock at how events are unfolding. There is a repeated narrative that no one could have predicted this, but that is not entirely accurate. Because analysts, strategists, and policymakers have studied this exact scenario for decades. They have run simulations, they have examined the risks, and many of them reached similar conclusions: that a conflict with Iran would not remain limited, that it would expand, that it would involve multiple regions, and that it would carry consequences far beyond the battlefield. Now, this is also why, despite tensions over many years, previous U.S. administrations avoided direct large-scale conflict with Iran. It was not because the option was unavailable, it was because the cost and the unpredictability was too high. There was always an understanding that once such a conflict began, controlling its direction would become extremely difficult, and that even if initial operations were successful, the long-term consequences could outweigh any short-term gains. One of the recurring patterns in modern warfare is underestimation, the belief that a conflict will be quick, that it will be decisive, that it will end before its deeper consequences fully emerge. We have seen this before. Leaders enter conflicts expecting rapid outcomes only to find themselves drawn into prolonged, complex struggles. This is often referred to as asymmetrical warfare. In such conflicts, one side may be militarily stronger, but the other side compensates through resilience, strategy, and the ability to impose long-term costs. They may not win outright, but they can ensure that the opposing sides do not win easily either. This is the reality the world is facing now. A conflict where military superiority does not guarantee control, smaller or weaker actors can still inflict significant damage, and outcomes are shaped over time, not decided instantly. The situation involving Iran reflects this dynamic. Even if its military capabilities are degraded in certain areas, its ability to influence the region, disrupt systems, and extend the conflict remains significant. Another key issue raised in discussions is whether lessons from other conflicts have been fully applied. For example, the ongoing war involving Russia and Ukraine has demonstrated how modern warfare evolves, particularly with the use of drones, asymmetric tactics, and sustained resistance. Some analysts argue that failing to fully study and adapt to these lessons may have limited strategic preparation in the current situation. This raises an important question. Was enough done to anticipate how Iran might respond? Now, what is becoming increasingly clear is that this conflict is no longer contained within a single geographic boundary. It is affecting regional stability, global energy markets, military alliances, political calculations worldwide. And with each passing day, the number of variables increases. More actors become involved, more risks emerge, and the path toward resolution becomes less clear. Now, attention is turning toward a critical possibility: the use of ground forces. Military operations are reportedly being considered that could involve direct operations inside Iran. Such actions would represent a major escalation because once ground troops are deployed, the nature of the conflict changes entirely. It becomes more direct, more costly, and far more difficult to reverse. So, as the world watches this situation unfold, it is worth remembering something important. This is not a completely unpredictable crisis. It is, in many ways, the realization of warnings that were given years ago. Warnings about escalation, warnings about regional instability, warnings about economic consequences, and perhaps most importantly, warnings about how difficult it would be to control what comes next. Because once a conflict of this scale begins to expand, it does not follow a simple path. It becomes something else, something larger, something far more difficult to contain. And the question now is not just how this war will continue, but whether the world is prepared for where it might lead. And now Iran has issued a stark warning, signaling a potential escalation in its military campaign against both the United States and Israel. In a strongly worded statement broadcast on Iranian state television, a senior military spokesperson declared that the conflict is far from over and would continue until Iran's adversaries face what he described as humiliation and surrender. The message carried a clear tone of defiance and retaliation. The spokesperson warned that the attacks carried out so far by the United States and its allies would pale in comparison to what lies ahead. He emphasized that Iran is preparing for far more intense and destructive operations in the coming phase of the war. According to the statement, the targets that have already been struck by opposing forces are considered insignificant within Iran's broader military framework. The spokesperson insisted that Iran's most critical defense and production capabilities are located in undisclosed and highly secure sites, locations that he claimed were remain completely unknown and inaccessible to enemy forces. Inside Iran, reactions to the recent speech by Donald Trump appear to be shaped by a mix of familiarity and skepticism. Many Iranians, according to local reports, are not surprised by the tone of Trump's remarks. His rhetoric is widely seen as consistent with both his current stance and his approach during his previous presidency. The use of strong, confrontational language is something the Iranian public and leadership have grown accustomed to over the years. However, beyond the rhetoric, there is also a sense of uncertainty. Analysts and citizens alike are struggling to interpret the broader strategy behind Trump's statements. His messaging appears to combine aggressive threats with hints of diplomacy, creating what observers describe as strategic ambiguity. Interestingly, Iran seems to be responding in kind. Officials are deliberately maintaining a level of uncertainty about their own capabilities. The recent military statement highlighting undisclosed weapon systems is seen as part of this approach, an effort to project strength while keeping adversaries guessing. This dual layer of ambiguity on both sides is adding complexity to an already volatile situation, making it increasingly difficult to predict how the conflict might evolve. As diplomatic tensions continue to rise, the situation on the ground is intensifying. The conflict has now entered its second month with a sustained campaign of airstrikes targeting various locations across Iran. Initially, these strikes were largely focused on military installations and government-related facilities. However, over time, there has been a noticeable shift in targeting strategy. According to figures released by the Iranian Red Crescent, more than 92,000 civilian structures have been affected since the start of the war. These include residential buildings, hospitals, schools, healthcare centers, and humanitarian facilities. The scale of damage suggests a widening impact that goes far beyond strictly military objectives. In recent weeks, the focus of attacks appears to have expanded further into Iran's economic and industrial backbone. Key sectors now under pressure include the steel industry, with major facilities such as Folad Mubarak Steel Company reportedly suffering significant disruptions. Several production units at the plant have been forced to halt operations, raising concerns about broader economic consequences. Now, the steel sector is particularly critical, not only for exports but also for its role in supporting multiple downstream industries. Disruptions here could have ripple effects across manufacturing and construction. Now, other industries have also been impacted. Pharmaceutical companies have reported damage to production capabilities, while oil storage facilities and energy infrastructure have increasingly come under threat. Perhaps most concerning for ordinary citizens is the growing fear of attacks on power plants and electricity networks. Discussions around potential strikes on these essential services are fueling anxiety across the country, as such actions could severely disrupt daily life. For the civilian population, the situation is becoming increasingly uncertain and stressful. The expansion of targets from military to industrial and potentially civilian infrastructure has heightened fears about what might come next. Interruptions to electricity, healthcare, and essential services would not only deepen the humanitarian crisis, but also make recovery significantly more difficult in the long term. As the conflict continues to evolve, both the scale and nature of the war appear to be shifting, raising serious concerns about escalation and its broader regional consequences. Now, a fresh wave of violence has struck Israel, as an intercepted Iranian missile attack has left at least 5 people injured near Tel Aviv. According to initial reports, debris from a cluster-type missile scattered across multiple locations, causing significant damage on the ground. In one affected district, fragments struck critical water infrastructure, raising concerns about disruptions to essential services. Several vehicles were also damaged, while multiple locations within Tel Aviv reportedly experienced direct or indirect impacts. Observers on the ground described the past 24 hours as particularly intense and unsettling for Israeli civilians, despite earlier claims in Israeli media that Iran's missile capabilities had been weakening with fewer launches targeting central regions. The last barrage appears to have contradicted that narrative. The scale and persistence of the attacks have come as a shock to many. The strikes continued throughout the day and into the night, creating an atmosphere of constant ridicule and uncertainty. For many Israelis, this has raised serious questions about the effectiveness of military assurances given since the beginning of the war, especially regarding the reduction of Iran's offensive capabilities. The timing has added another layer of distress. The attacks coincided with Passover, one of the most significant religious observances in Judaism. Instead of celebrations, many families found themselves sheltering from missile threats, with disrupted routines and sleepless nights becoming the norm. The situation is also increasing pressure on Israeli leadership, particularly Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. While President Donald Trump recently outlined his vision for the conflict, his remarks notably lacked direct reference to Israel. This omission has raised concerns among Israelis, especially given the close coordination between the two countries at the start of the war. Two major concerns dominate public discourse in Israel right now. First, there is a growing perception that key war objectives, particularly those related to weakening or transforming Iran's political system, have not been achieved. Second, and perhaps more urgently, is the situation in Lebanon. Discussions about a potential ceasefire are becoming increasingly complex, especially as Iran links any agreement to conditions involving Hezbollah. At the same time, Israeli military operations continue to push toward the Litani River, a move that signals ongoing strategic ambitions in southern Lebanon. There is also concern that the United States could once again push for a ceasefire similar to previous interventions. Such a move could be politically damaging for Netanyahu, especially as elections approach. Having promised a decisive and complete victory over the past several years, Netanyahu now faces a complex reality. Threats remain active across multiple fronts, from Hamas in Gaza to Hezbollah in Lebanon, while Iran itself remains defiant. Another critical issue emerging from this prolonged conflict is the strain on Israel's military capacity. Since the Ahdas of October 7, 2023, Israeli forces have been engaged in continuous operations across multiple regions, including Gaza, Lebanon, and even parts of Syria. This sustained level of military activity has placed immense pressure on resources and personnel. Military officials have openly acknowledged challenges in maintaining sufficient troop levels. There is an increasing need for additional recruits as existing forces are stretched thin across multiple operational zones. This strain has also exposed internal divisions within Israeli society. One notable issue is the ongoing debate over military service, particularly among certain religious communities where enlistment rates remain low. This has become a sensitive political and global Israeli issue, further complicating efforts to reinforce the al-Jaish. Now, tensions between the military leadership and political authorities are also becoming more visible. While political leaders advocate for expanding military objectives, including maintaining positions in parts of Lebanon and Syria, military officials are raising concerns about whether such ambitions are realistically sustainable. The broader strategic vision being discussed in some political circles, often referred to as expanding influence or establishing extended buffer zones, is facing serious practical limitations. Experts point out that both geography and population constraints make large-scale territorial expansion difficult to sustain. Israel's population size limits the number of people who can be mobilized for long-term military engagements, especially while maintaining a functioning economy. Military leaders have also highlighted the difficulty of maintaining control over multiple locations simultaneously. Challenges are already evident in areas like the West Bank, where tensions remain high and security demands continue to grow. Additionally, operations in Syria and Lebanon require ongoing military presence and resources, further stretching capabilities. Many analysts argue that while certain strategic adjustments on the ground may continue, particularly in specific areas like Area C in the West Bank, broader ambitions may not be achievable in the long term. Sustained conflict also carries economic consequences. A nation cannot remain in a constant state of war indefinitely without impacting productivity, stability, and civilian life. As the conflict intensifies across multiple fronts, Israel finds itself at a critical juncture. On one hand, there is pressure to maintain military momentum and achieve long-promised objectives. On the other, there are growing signs of fatigue, both within the military and among civilians. With increasing regional complexity, unresolved political goals, and mounting human and economic costs, the situation is evolving into a test of endurance as much as strategy. Now stay tuned for more updates and also subscribe to the channel. Thank you.